They said a woman could not run a survey crew. She had already filed the maps. The men from the county surveyor's office arrived in Belknap on a Wednesday morning in September, and they arrived with the expectation of finding a man. They had been told that the survey of the Eastern Valley, 64 sections of rolling rangeland and standing timber and fertile creek bottom that the territorial government in Helena needed accurately mapped and monumented before the railroad right-of-way could be legally established, had been completed ahead of schedule, and that the maps were already filed with the land office in Helena. They had been told that the survey crew was efficient and accurate, and that the work was the best the office had seen from a field team in 3 years. What they had not been told, what no one had thought to mention, or perhaps had deliberately omitted, was that the survey crew was run by a woman. Her name was Josephine Farr. She was 30 years old. She had learned surveying from her father, Amos Farr, who had been a surveyor for the Army Corps of Engineers, and who had taught Josephine to use a transit and a chain and a compass and a rod before she was 12. Because Amos Farr had no sons, and because Josephine had asked with the persistent curiosity of a child who wants to understand how the world is measured, and because Amos Farr was the kind of man who believed that a question deserved an answer, and a student deserved a teacher, regardless of whether the student wore trousers or a skirt. She had worked alongside her father's survey crews throughout her 20s, first as a chainman dragging the heavy steel tape through brush and creek, then as a rodman, then as a skilled transitman, and finally, after her father's death 2 years earlier, as the crew chief, the person who planned the lines, set the stations, calculated the closures, and drew the final maps that were filed with the land office, and that determined where roads would run, and where fences would stand, and where bridges would be built, and where the railroad would lay its iron across the open land. She was good at it. She was not good at it in the qualified way that people say a woman is good at something when they mean she is competent, despite the inconvenience of her sex. She was good at it, absolutely, without qualification, in the way that a person is good at a thing when the thing is the central fact of their life, and they have given it 20 years of practice and study and attention. Her closures were tight, consistently under the allowable error. Her maps were clean and beautifully drafted. Her calculations were exact to the last decimal. The crew she ran, 3 men, all of whom had worked for her father, and who had stayed on after Amos's death without hesitation, because Josephine Farr knew the work better than anyone they had ever met in 30 combined years of field experience, and because the work was what mattered, and who did it was incidental, respected her, without reservation, and without the need for anyone to make a speech about it. The men from the county office were named Drucker and Phelps. Drucker was the senior man, 52 years old, thick through the chest and face, with the particular air of bureaucratic authority that comes from spending 20 years in an office that controls something. Phelps was younger and considerably quieter, and carried a leather case of documents and correspondence. They had come to inspect the filed maps and to confirm the survey before the railroad committed its route, and they had come expecting to shake hands with a man named J. Farr, and to review the work over coffee and cigars in the land office, and to be finished and back on the stage by noon. Josephine met them at the land office. She was wearing a canvas field jacket over a cotton blouse, and a practical skirt, cut short enough to clear brush, and her hair was pulled back under a broad-brimmed hat, and she had a battered leather transit case slung over one shoulder, because she had been recalibrating the instrument that morning in the lot behind the hotel. She extended her hand without hesitation. "I am Josephine Farr," she said. Her voice was clear and level. "I filed the maps." Drucker looked at her hand. He looked at the transit case. He looked at Phelps. He did not take her hand. "J. Farr," he said. The correspondent said J. Farr. "My name is Josephine. The J is for Josephine. We were expecting a man. Yes, most people are." Drucker's face did the thing that faces do when a person encounters something that does not fit the categories they have established for the world. A tightening around the eyes, a compression of the mouth, a stiffening of the jaw, the visible recalculation of a situation that has become more complicated than anticipated. He looked at the transit case again. "A woman cannot file an official survey with the Territorial Land Office," he said. "And yet I have. The maps are filed. The closure calculations are attached. The work is complete. The work will need to be verified. The work is verified." Mr. Albright at the land office checked every closure himself. The error of closure on the primary traverse is 1 in 14,000. The acceptable standard is 1 in 5,000. My work is nearly 3 times more accurate than what the territory requires. Drucker did not respond to the numbers because the numbers were not the point. The point, for Drucker, was not accuracy or competence, or the quality of the maps, but the principle that a woman surveyor was a contradiction in terms, a thing that should not exist, and that the existence of it was an affront to the order of things as he understood them. He was not a cruel man. He was a categorical man, which was in some ways worse, because cruelty can be confronted and argued with, but categories sit in a man's mind like bedrock and do not move. "I will need to see the field notes," he said. "They are in the land office. I will show you." She showed him. She showed him the field notes. 3 leather-bound books filled with measurements, angles, bearings, distances, and station descriptions, written in a hand that was small and precise and meticulous. She showed him the finished maps, drawn on fine linen in India ink, the lines crisp and certain, the lettering uniform, the contour intervals consistent and accurate. She showed him the closure calculations, the traverse adjustments, the magnetic declination corrections, and the monument descriptions. She showed him every scrap of documentation, because hiding anything would have given him a reason to doubt, and she did not intend to give him reasons. Drucker examined the work for 2 hours. He examined it with the painstaking attention of a man who is looking for a mistake that he desperately needs to find, because the finding of the mistake would confirm what he already believed, and the not finding of it would require him to believe something new, and believing something new is the hardest and most painful thing a categorical man can ever be asked to do. He did not find a mistake. Phelps, who had been quiet through all of this, said, "The work is excellent." Drucker looked at Phelps the way a man looks at a subordinate who has said the wrong thing in front of the wrong person. Phelps did not flinch. Phelps was 26 years old and had studied engineering at a college in Ohio, and he knew what accurate survey work looked like, and he was looking at it, and the fact that it had been produced by a woman was interesting to him but not disqualifying, because Phelps belonged to a younger generation that was just beginning to suspect that the categories they had inherited from their fathers and grandfathers might not be as solid or as useful as the generation before them had always believed. "The railroad will not accept maps filed by a woman," Drucker said. "The railroad will accept maps filed by a licensed surveyor. I am licensed. The territory issued my license 2 years ago. Under what authority? Under the authority of the territorial surveyor, who examined my work and my credentials, and who issued the license, because the work and the credentials met the requirements. The license does not specify sex, Mr. Drucker. It specifies competence." The argument continued for 3 days. Drucker sent a telegraph to the county office. The county office sent a telegraph to the territorial surveyor. The territorial surveyor, whose name was Albright, and who had personally reviewed Josephine's work and found it to be the best he had received in his tenure, sent a telegraph back that said, "Maps filed, work verified. License valid, proceed." During those 3 days, a man named Caleb Straight watched the argument unfold. Caleb Straight was the railroad's advance man in Belknap, the person sent ahead to negotiate easements, purchase right-of-way, and coordinate with the survey crews that would determine where the rails would go. He was 34, lean and angular, with the weathered look of a man who had spent a decade riding between towns that did not yet exist, laying the groundwork for the iron that would connect them. He had been in Belknap for a week. He had already read the filed maps carefully before Drucker arrived. He had studied them with the careful attention of a man whose job depended on the accuracy of other people's work, and he had concluded 2 things with quiet certainty. First, that the maps were excellent, and second, that the person who had drawn them understood the land in a way that most surveyors did not just as a set of measurements, but as a place, with drainage patterns and soil types and sight lines that the maps captured with a subtlety he had rarely seen. He introduced himself to Josephine on the second day of Drucker's formal protest, outside the land office, in the dusty September sunlight. "I have read your maps," he said. And they are the best maps I have worked from in 6 years with the railroad. The contour work on the eastern ridge is particularly good. You found the natural bench for the grade that 3 other surveyors missed. I walked the ridge myself, twice, in different seasons. The bench is only visible when the grass is short, after the late summer drought, when the rock shoulder shows through. That is not how most surveyors work. Most surveyors have not been walking ridges since they were 11. Caleb smiled. It was a small smile, brief and genuine. The smile of a person recognizing something familiar and valued. He recognized in Josephine Farr the same quality that he carried in himself, the understanding that work done with care and attention and deep knowledge of the land was not just a professional obligation, but a form of respect, a way of honoring the place and the people who would live on it and build on it for generations. "Drucker will not stop," he said. "He has sent to the county." "I know. I have read the telegraphs. Mr. Albright at the land office showed them to me. The railroad does not care whether you are a woman. The railroad cares whether the grade is right and the curves are safe and the bridges will hold. Your maps show me that they will." "Then tell Drucker." "I have told Drucker. Drucker does not listen to the railroad's advance man. Drucker listens to the county." "And the county?" "The county listens to the territorial surveyor, and the territorial surveyor has already ruled in your favor. Then it is settled. It is settled on paper. It is not settled in Drucker's mind. Drucker's mind is the last place it will be settled, if it is settled at all." On the third day, the telegraph from Albright arrived, and Drucker read it standing in the land office, with Phelps beside him, and Josephine across the counter, and Caleb leaning against the doorframe. And the telegraph said what the telegraph said. Maps filed, work verified, license valid, proceed. And Drucker folded the paper, and put it in his pocket, and looked at Josephine and said, "This is not finished." "It is finished," Josephine said. "The maps are filed. The survey is complete. The railroad has its route. The work is done, Mr. Drucker. It was done before you arrived." Drucker left Belknap that afternoon on the southbound stage with Phelps in his leather case, and his categories intact and undisturbed, because categories do not change in 3 days. They change across generations, slowly, the way rivers change course, not all at once but grain by grain, and Josephine Farr was one of the grains. Caleb Straight stayed. He stayed because the railroad work required him to stay, because the easements had to be negotiated, and the right-of-way had to be purchased, and the stakes had to be set, and all of it depended on the maps that Josephine had drawn, and the maps required skilled interpretation in the field by the person who had walked the ground, and that interpretation required Josephine. They walked the survey line together on a Thursday morning, a week after Drucker left. Together they walked the long eastern ridge, where Josephine had found the natural bench for the railroad grade, and Caleb saw it the way she had described it. The shoulder of rock beneath the grass, the gentle curve that would carry the rails around the ridge without a cut, saving the railroad an estimated 6 months of blasting and grading, and $20,000 in construction costs. He looked at Josephine standing on the ridge with her transit, sighting along the line she had drawn on linen, and he understood with sudden and complete clarity that what he was looking at was not a woman who could survey, but a surveyor, complete and whole, and that the distinction mattered enormously, because one framing was about exceptions and novelty, and the other was about identity and truth. "You should bid the next contract," he said. "The Western Valley, 80 sections. The railroad will accept your bid." "Will they?" "I will make certain they do." Josephine looked at him. She looked at him across the transit, across the survey line, across the eastern valley that she had measured and mapped and filed, and she saw in him something she had not expected to find in a railroad man. Not just respect for her work, which was gratifying but not uncommon among people who understood numbers and angles and the language of the land, but respect for her as a person, for the woman who had chosen this difficult and unconventional work, and fought for it, year after year, and done it exceptionally well, despite every entrenched category that said she should not exist. "Why?" she said. "Because the work is good. Because the railroad needs good work. And because I would like to keep walking survey lines with the person who found this bench. And the next contract would give me a reason." The reason was professional, and the reason was personal, and the blending of the two was honest, because it was stated plainly, without decoration, the way a survey line is stated, from this point to that point, bearing and distance, measurable and true and unambiguous. "I will submit the bid," Josephine said. "Good." They stood on the ridge in the September light, the valley below them measured and mapped and certain, and the certainty was the thing they shared, the certainty of work done well, of lines drawn true, of a world that could be known through careful observation and patient calculation, and of two people who had found in each other the rarest and most valuable thing on the frontier, someone who understood the work and the person doing it, and who did not need the difference explained.